York, sunny beach. Shanghai. 3 unique cities in different corners of the world with one thing in common: gentrification. The word used to describe the developments in communities to make them conform to middle-class standards. This seems easy enough to understand, right? But on closer analysis, you can start to see the problems. What are middle-class tastes? And do these areas really need improving? Gentrification. The word that springs to mind when we see cereal cafes opening beside job centres in dilapidated council estates, and vegan restaurants replacing convenience stores. Gentrification is a buzzword that has been used to create feelings of distrust and hatred. But the engines of gentrification aren't always disengaged, self-invested motivators. Sometimes the engines of gentrification are individuals who just want the current locals to have a better life than they did. In London, gentrification is unavoidable. Urban cities have quickly become quirky, must-see areas, featured in Time Out's London articles as top 25 places to visit. Somehow, the graffiti on these walls have become staple Instagram backgrounds for hipster bloggers, often accompanied with their artistic yet meaningless captions. These streets have become an aesthetic, rather than a glaring indication of government's negligence and the economic inequality that infiltrates many of our communities. As residents migrate to these areas, they are often met with tension and skepticism from locals, because not only are they taking advantage of the low property prices, property developers often come in and act as though they are transforming these areas, bringing with them economic prosperity. Gentrification often results in 2 cultures and lifestyles being forced together like mismatched pieces of a jigsaw. At a time when the world seems obsessed with urban life and street culture, it seems ironic that we are repeatedly destroying and modifying the very streets on which this culture was born. Discussions about gentrification have now become polarized. On one hand, you have die-hard supporters of these development schemes, but on the other, you have justice warriors who will do anything to protect their cities. And to be honest, it's not really that hard to sympathize with both sides of the argument. I mean, who wouldn't want to fight to protect the city that raised them? Wouldn't you be angry if all your community spaces and local businesses were repeatedly shutting down due to rising rent? But then again, at the same time, shouldn't those same people be grateful that those with the funds and social capital to influence change are doing just that? I mean, what harm can really come from renovating businesses and creating new ones that will bring in wealthier individuals? But despite these questions, there doesn't seem to be an effective discourse surrounding gentrification, one that creates a solution that will satisfy all interested parties. So if there isn't a win-win solution to gentrification, who should lose out? You see, I live in London, but studying in the Midlands has made me more alert to the super gentrification taking place in London. I can walk down Wembley High Road and see a Poundland, a Wilkinson's, a Primark and a McDonald's. But just 2 minutes away is Wembley Stadium, designer outlet stores and high-rise apartments. And this isn't an isolated example. Grenfell Tower tells its own harrowing story of gentrification. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea Council was unwilling to spend an extra £5,000 on fireproof cladding, which could have saved hundreds of lives, despite making £3.5 million in that same year from the sale of just 2 council homes. So if this behaviour can go unchallenged, I now pose to you this question: should we be scared of gentrification? You see, decades ago, gentrification was perceived to be only a Western world problem, but this could not be further from the truth. Because it is not just the urban cities of New York, London, Amsterdam and Toronto that are affected by gentrification. As eastern cities have become tourist destinations, their cities have become almost unrecognisable as property developers have capitalised on growing interest in these cities. These developers often defend their projects by referring to it as social regeneration or urban revitalisation. And the use of these neutral terms is highly tactical, because by not saying gentrification, they avoid major backlash from activist groups. They often defend these projects by arguing that upscaling the community will inevitably improve the lives of all citizens, because as businesses are created, It encourages a trickling down of knowledge and wealth between old inhabitants and new. But in reality, gentrified towns are crippled by tension and subtle segregation. The upscaling increases property prices, meaning that many locals can no longer afford to live in their homes. Commenting on the gentrification in New York, Richard Florida said, "This back-to-the-city movement of the creative class has a dark side. Within those urban superstars, we have a winner-takes-all system." And this is true. In many gentrified towns, there is much tension, and which can often result in volatile acts of resistance. Commenting on the gentrification in New York, Spike Lee famously said, "You've got to have some respect. You can't just come in where people have a culture that's been laid down for generations, and you come in and now things got to change." All over the world, people are fighting back against gentrification. And although I personally don't support violence, it seems as though these people had exhausted all other options. In London, the serial killer cafe was ambushed by activists as they fought back against a class war in their area. In America, grassroots organizations such as the Brooklyn Anti-Gentrification Network, Take Back the Bronx, and Decolonize This Place, have been instrumental in voicing the opinions of locals who are opposed to the whitewashing of their neighborhoods. In 2016, anti-gentrification protests in Berlin turned to riots, with 123 officers being injured. Likewise, in Shanghai, where protesting without a permit is illegal, residents here use passive forms of resistance to fight back against developments. And lastly, in Amsterdam, sex workers here protested against Project 1012, which tried to change sex brothels into arts boutiques. And the list goes on. The world has become obsessed with cleaning up its worst cities, while unfortunately at the same time manipulating the existing ecosystem in these societies. In London, there are numerous examples of residents being moved from their homes because they no longer fit the city's new identity. Property developers and investors have created some sort of treasure hunt in which they actively seek out areas associated with low-income families. One real estate website posted an article titled "Get In Before the Skips," which had actually advised readers to invest in grotty and miserable areas and to look past the, quote, "general air of neglect that can be found in such areas." So when I asked, should we be scared of gentrification, you can now start to see how attitudes surrounding the problem are just as difficult as the act itself. The London Borough of Southwark has become the face of gentrification in London. The council's website has boasted that its projects will create an economy boost of 34.4%. Old Kent Road is set to undergo one of the largest regeneration schemes in London, in which 20,000 new homes will be created. But yet, only 7,000 will be, quote, affordable. There are also plans to reconfigure Elephant and Castle as part of a £3 billion regeneration scheme, in which 979 new homes will be created. This sounds great, right? But unsurprisingly, just 342 of these homes will be affordable. So now you can understand why Southwark locals are scared of gentrification. They are being displaced from their homes to make way for a new class of resident who will never truly appreciate the significance of their local landmarks. Gentrifiers focus on aesthetics, not people, because people to them are aesthetics. So what happens when people no longer fit this aesthetic? Displacement. When towns are gentrified, people experience displacement both directly and indirectly. People experience direct displacement when their homes literally no longer exist, as can be seen with Fatahillah Square in Jakarta, Indonesia, and Haygate Estate in Elephant and Castle. In Fatahillah Square, street vendors were moved from their homes to a swampy parking lot where they had absolutely no way of making a living. Likewise, when the Haygate Estate was renovated, instead of simply rehousing the original inhabitants, most of the flats were sold to foreign investors. So where do these people go? Many residents of the Haygate Estate, unfortunately, were displaced to other parts of London, but some were left with no choice but to move as far out as Slough, Cheshunt, and Rochester. And such an unnatural upheaval is traumatic for anyone. Changing schools, making new friends, finding new jobs is a difficult task. So yes, in this scenario, maybe locals should be scared of gentrification. But while it's very easy to portray gentrification in a negative light, you must consider the positives. Renovating and refurbishing buildings obviously improve the appearance of a town. It's a given that clean and orderly buildings are more appealing to look at than run-down, dilapidated ones. Statistics have even found a correlation between gentrification and crime rates, because as investments in an area increase, crime rates decrease, because police presence in the area is strengthened. Some have even argued that gentrification should be protected because it encourages a trickling down of wealth, knowledge, and knowledge between the old inhabitants and the new. Lance Freeman argues that Harlem locals should not be scared of gentrification. He found that low-income families in gentrifying neighbourhoods were actually less likely to be displaced from their homes than low-income families in non-gentrifying neighbourhoods. He even went as far as to explain that gentrification provides incentive for people to stay because they benefit from the changes being made in their area. And the same can be said for other parts of the world as well. Countries such as Jamaica, Singapore, and Bulgaria are gentrifying their worst cities to make them more appealing to tourists, thus bringing in more profit for local vendors. I visited Jamaica 2 years ago, and I went to Runaway Beach with my family. And while I loved staying in the resort, when I travelled to see family in other parts of the island, I felt uncomfortable. Because while I was in the resort, it was easy to forget I was actually in Jamaica. But when I travelled to Maypen and Negril, it shocked me that I saw more Nike stores and KFCs than authentic Jamaican jerk houses. But this isn't the case everywhere. In Singapore, gentrification has actually occurred positively. Towns such as Tiong Bahru and Joo Chiat have worked to gentrify their areas while still paying respect to the residents that live there. They've done this by creating heritage trails that show off and promote the town's origins. And when I visited Sunny Beach in Bulgaria last summer, although the town felt saturated with hotels and attraction sites, every business seemed to be doing well. It felt like at the end of every street there was a construction site. But interestingly enough, vendors there were actually excited by the influx of wealth and the investments being made in their area. So it seems as though opinions regarding gentrification are subjective. Where individuals feel that they can influence change and benefit from it, they are more open to investments being made in their area. Locals want to and should be heard. There are many people who wish to see their areas improved, but may not always have the connections to make their voices heard. Those who experience the worst consequences of gentrification may not be members of their community council. They may not have the social capital to influence such decisions. But this is not an excuse to overlook and dismiss them. If investors wish to successfully revitalise the town, they cannot do so without the support of locals. It appears that there are many ulterior motives that could easily be aligned with effective discourse. You have residents who want to renovate their town while still paying respect to the history. And you have investors and developers who wish to unleash the town's potential. I think if we are serious about creating communities that benefit all members, there is no way that we can do so without paying respect to the values and traditions that are embedded in the city streets. Development should be incremental so as to allow locals time to adjust to these changes and find ways of benefiting new improvements. Heritage sites should be promoted. Developers should find ways of not creating communities where people lead atomistic lives. So, modernisation of the community cannot just apply to the city's aesthetics. The community's identity should also be modernised so as to pay respect to the social values and the qualities of each group in that society. So for the last time I ask you, should we be scared of gentrification? The decision ultimately is yours, but I say yes. Yes, be scared. Why are we not concerned that the history embedded in our buildings and landscapes is being eradicated to make way for a new class of resident? Why are we not fighting and addressing this silent killer of culture? Gentrification is not something to be trivialised or ignored. The streets that personify its inhabitants are being knocked away to make way for a new class of resident, one blind to culture and social character, numb to urban struggle. So in the words of Rebecca Solnit, gentrification is just a fin above water, below is the rest of the shark. Thank you.